A Rolex quartz watch? Really? Exactly. Quartz is part of watch history and shouldn't be ignored. Rolex is most known for their mechanical timepieces, but from the 1970s through 2001, they were also producing battery-powered and quartz wristwatches. I'm Felix. In today's video, we will show you how Rolex mastered the quartz crisis with the production of the Oysterquartz range. So let's check the intro and get into today's video. The Oysterquartz is a timepiece with a special history. It's a relic from the time of the quartz crisis. The Swiss watch industry perfected its mechanical movements until well into the 1960s. The robustness and the accuracy of the movement were constantly increased, and nobody looked left or right, so no one noticed how new technology was developing. But interesting to know is that Rolex had been researching electronic watches since the 1950s and was awarded for their first electromechanical watch patent in the beginning 1950s. Over the 3 decades from 1960 and 1919, Rolex was awarded 50 patents. 21 of these were for electronic watches and digital displays. Rolex investment in quartz technology was significant. It feels like they saw something coming, but were still too late. Anyway, manufacturers such as Seiko, for example, were already working intensively on new movements driven via quartz. The initially extremely expensive technology was suitable for mass production in the early 1970s, and the new possibilities of quartz watches was really hyped up. They were more accurate and much cheaper than mechanical timepieces, and much cheaper in sense of manufacturing and of course also of selling. So brands like Seiko, Citizen and Casio had a lot of success. The classic mechanical watches were considered old, out of fashion, and were hardly ever asked for by buyers. So this was the beginning of a crisis for the classic watch industry. Many well-known companies, especially in Switzerland, went bankrupt, and approximately 60% of the employees lost their jobs. Of the originally 90,000 jobs in Switzerland, only 30,000 remained within a few years. At this time, Rolex also broke with tradition and came up with a quartz model for the market. So at the end of 1977, the Rolex Oysterquartz was born. It wasn't the first quartz watch or even the first quartz Rolex, but it set and remains the gold standard for the class. Rolex introduced their first commercially available quartz watch in 1970, also 7 years earlier than the Oysterquartz. The quartz date 5100, also known as Texano, was driven by the Beta 21 movement. This movement were used by 16 different Swiss companies, including Omega and Anycar. After making only 1,000 units of the Beta 21, Rolex started to develop their own quartz movement for the watch that would become the Oysterquartz. Then in 1977, Rolex introduced, in contrast to many other manufacturers, their first entirely in-house quartz movement, 5053, for the Rolex Datejust. At launch, these were remarkable technological achievements created with a level of fit and finish befitting the milestone achievement. Rolex designed and built these 11 jewel movements like a mechanical movement with bridges, plates and lever escapements. Very special is that Rolex largely used in-house kit here and took the mechanism of the automatic 30-35 for the 50-35 movement. This mechanism had already been used in many other Rolex models, such as Submarine and Datejusts, and was supplemented with the electronics and the stepper motor. It's been told that the movement shouldn't differ more than a minute per year. So it's no wonder that experts consider the Rolex quartz movement to be one of the best ever built with a battery. The whole appearance of the Oysterquartz was clearly influenced by the Datejust, but it has a slight twist as Rolex decided to use a more angular tonneau style case with an integrated bracelet. The Oysterquartz Datejusts were produced in 3 references. The first was the stainless steel with the reference 17,000. Then we have the bicolor stainless steel with yellow gold with the reference 17,013, and a stainless steel with white gold bezel with the reference 17,014. And the overall style is very similar to the AP Royal Oak, which has a completely different design language compared to the conventional Datejust back in the day. The thick tonneau case design unmistakably screams the 1970s, with flat and angular surfaces and an integrated bracelet. Rolex made sure that the Oysterquartz still stood out within the Datejust and the Day-Date range. The appearance of this case is the same over the whole lifetime. They were all coming in 36 mm with diagonal concentric brushing of the lux, vertical brushing of the area where the bracelet meets the case, polished sides of the case and polished bevels. As well, the bezel of the stainless steel 70,000 is a plain one. All other bezels were fluted. Spread over all models, 7 different dial colors were available: silver, black, blue, white, champagne and brown. And the most common hour marker are slim baton indexes, but you can find also Roman numerals. The second hand has an incredibly crisp tick, and there are split opinion about that. So yeah, let me hold it on a mic. So some love it and some hate it. For us it is so satisfying to see the second hand hitting every mark precisely, forming a straight line. Another interesting fact to know is that in difference to other Datejust and Day-Date models, the reference and serial numbers of the watch are engraved in the back side of the watch casing. And as I said, the Oysterquartz models have an integrated bracelet. Not all of these bracelets had the same design. The completely stainless steel Oysterquartz had a bracelet which remembers slightly of a regular oyster bracelet. The most sporty bracelet of them all in our opinion. The steel and gold models, the 7013 and 14, have a bracelet with smaller inner links. They remember more of the Jubilee bracelets. But all of them feature this cushion-shaped bracelet style, which gives this timepiece a bigger physical presence on the wrist. Apart from the numerals and bracelets of our 2 references with reference 17,000 and 17,013, you can spot a significant difference on the dial. One features the COSC certification and the other not. Yeah, and this is easy explained. The Oysterquartz Datejusts manufactured during the years 77 and 78 carry the uncertified 50-35 movement, and all watches from approximately 79 until the end of production 2001 carry the certified 50-35 movement. With an uncertified movement, the text "Superlative Chronometer officially certified" cannot be written on the dial. Consequently, the early Oysterquartz Datejust watches have a dial lacking the chronometer text. These dials only have the 3 lines: Rolex, Datejust, Oysterquartz, and called Mark I dials or 3-liners among Oysterquartz collectors. Because they were only produced for 2 years, they are much rarer and more expensive to come by. But all Rolex Oysterquartz watches are kind of rare because only 25,000 pieces were produced in over 25 years. Over the decades, Rolex introduced 20 different Oysterquartz references. 1 Oysterquartz date, aka the Taxeno, then 3 different Oysterquartz Datejusts, and 16 Oysterquartz Day-Dates. So we absolutely love this classic timepiece with this integrated bracelet into the case and the iconic shape. And we also find the quartz part of Rolex history very interesting. For example, it was even carried on some expeditions. In 1987, for example, Reinhold Messner and Peter Haberler climbed the summit of the Mount Everest. It was an almost impossible endeavor, but they succeed as the first humans ever without the use of supplemental oxygen. On Messner's arm was the Rolex Oysterquartz, which defined the tough conditions and worked flawlessly at over 8,000 meters and in icy cold. Nowadays, the Oysterquartz Datejust is a rarity. You hardly see them on the wrist anywhere, and they got offered rarely. While a few people doubt that the Rolex Oysterquartz will ever be a collector's piece due to the fact that it is a quartz, the Oysterquartz has received more acknowledgement and attention in the last couple of years. And due to the limited numbers, it's not unlikely that they become more rare and more attractive in the future. So that's all for today. We hope you enjoyed today's video and hope to see you in our next one.